Hello there, it's time for the second part of my August wrap-up. I read another 5 books, which takes my total to 10, I think, which isn't bad considering that for a large portion of the month I wasn't actually reading anything, so I'm quite impressed with that number. So firstly, I read Carol Birch's Orphans of the Carnival. I will link my full review of this down below. I have to say I didn't overly enjoy it. It didn't grip me. I was quite bored by it and did consider DNFing it about halfway through. There were other issues, but predominantly it just didn't grip me. As I say, I will link my review down below. I don't want to go into too much here. Then I read Peter Pan by J.M. Barrie, and also, as a side note, Peter and Alice by John Logan. I read these for Jane Campbell's read-along of Peter Pan, which she's going to be doing a discussion video of at some point, so I wanted to read along with that. Also, it was nice to have an excuse to reread Peter Pan, because I did read this probably about 4 years ago now and didn't enjoy it. Now, I don't know what was wrong with me because I loved this. It was 5 stars without a doubt. I think before, I don't know whether I was in the place for it. I don't know if I concentrated properly. I think I kind of assumed that I knew the story and didn't really pay attention maybe, because it was so good. This is a lovely and very sad, actually, book. Of course, everyone knows the premise of Peter Pan, but not many people, I think, have actually read the proper Peter Pan as it was written by J.M. Barrie. Obviously, it started as a play, but he also adapted it for novel, which is this version here. Obviously, everyone knows the Disney version of it, but it's always better, of course, to go to the source material because there's so much richness in here. When I read it before, I really didn't like the character of Peter Pan, and I think that didn't help me. I don't know whether because I'm that bit older now I can kind of sympathise with him more, but obviously Peter Pan is the boy who doesn't want to grow up. He lives in Neverland with his lost boys and he is in complete denial basically about growing up, but he is constantly fighting quite literally with Hook, who is basically the summation of his own old age and the fact that Hook is quite literally being followed by a crocodile with a ticking clock. So time is literally following them, and it's all about just that fear of getting old and that feeling of having to grab on to every moment, but constantly the clock is after you, and it's so sad. It's also actually strangely romantic. Like, before I didn't get the romance between Peter and Wendy. I thought Peter was just selfish and using Wendy, but actually there is so much romance in here, and so much bittersweet romance, because they can never be together, because Peter will never let go of his fear. And how true is that? Like, this is so good. I would definitely recommend. And on the good theme, Peter and Alice by John Logan. I read this last year, absolutely loved it. It got an honourable mention in my favourites of the year, and again it just blew me away. I literally finished the second half of Peter Pan and then went on to this in the same evening, and it was so nice actually reading them back to back, because it really, the ending of Peter Pan was so sad, and into this really the feelings were already there, so this just completely took me to another level with it. So this is about, it's a fictionalised play of a real life event. So Peter Llewellyn Davis, who is the real Peter Pan, he was sort of who loosely Peter Pan was based on, and Alice Liddell, who was the inspiration for Alice in Wonderland, met at an event when Alice Liddell was quite old and Peter Llewellyn Davis I think was in his 30s, and they both had quite harrowing lives. Peter Llewellyn Davis had to deal with a lot of death and actually killed himself in the end by jumping in front of a train. And I think this very much looks at the pressure that people put on them. Obviously, it's quite common nowadays for people to live through a lens, but I think to this degree, it's hard for us to imagine how much they had people scrutinising everything they did, especially Peter Pan, you know, was the boy who never grew up, but he grew up, and like it'd be a headline, Peter Pan gets married and things, and so constantly you're just having this scrutiny on your life, and it was probably very difficult. This is really interesting, and it's a really fantastic look at just life in general, not even just their lives, but life in general, and the struggle of growing up and the struggle of not living up to people's expectations. I then read J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. This is the 4th in the Harry Potter series, and I read this after reading Prisoner of Azkaban last month and deciding that I wanted to read a Harry Potter a month so I could finally get through the series again properly. I've never actually read it completely, but I have read to the end, sort of thing, in a roundabout way. Last time I was reading the series, this is one that I skipped out. I got to it and just gave up after about 50 pages. I have to say I can see why. I mean, this is thick. My problem, I find it very hard to judge Harry Potter for what it is. I think there's always that pressure to either like it more than I do because it's Harry Potter, but also that pressure that maybe I'm being harsher on it because it's Harry Potter, and because there's the expectation there that it should be really good because everyone loves it, and I've always fallen a bit flat with them, to be honest. They've never blown me away. This one, I have to say, it was a slog. I didn't particularly enjoy it. I think my problem is that this is a kid's book. The fact that it's Harry Potter is irrelevant. A kid's book should not be this thick, and there are reasons for that. I just felt like it got boring. I mean, for me especially, the stories begin once they get to Hogwarts, really. We didn't get into this story until 160 pages in. That's a lot of reading to do to actually get into the story. And generally, I just found it a bit dull throughout. I thought I was going to whiz through it, and I didn't. It took me quite a long time, and I really didn't have the inspiration to pick this up for most of that time. I did enjoy the ending when things got a bit darker. I liked that aspect. I liked the meeting with Voldemort and the death, and the fact that it was going to those late places, because I think a lot of the time kids' books don't want to go to dark places, but I do think it's necessary that they do. But other than that, this didn't have much for me. I did give it 4 stars in the end because I did like the ending, but it could have been, I mean, half the size at least, and I feel like it showed that there was pressure and time constraints on this, and that it could have been edited down an awful lot, but obviously because it was Harry Potter and there was all the hype and everyone looked forward to the release dates, I feel like it shows that this one was kind of written in a rush. It didn't do it for me. I'm sorry. I don't know as well if reading them one a month is a good idea, because they are kids' books and because they were released sort of a while apart, there's a lot of backstory and like, this happened last time and oh, when this happened. And I feel like because I had just read that last month, it was kind of a bit like, oh yeah, okay. So I don't know whether I will carry on reading these one a month, but I certainly do intend to kind of rush through the last few because I'm fed up of having it hacking over me. I'm kind of fed up of series at the moment. I'm just not feeling them. Then, finally, I finished with John Burnside's The Dumb House. This kind of irritated me because it could have been a wonderful thing, and I don't know if it was a wonderful thing. My feelings are very confused about this. So this went round BookTube quite a while ago, probably about a year ago, or maybe even more. I don't know. I just don't know. This book, I think, firstly, going into it, I was kind of misled. I think the way that it's described, and the way the blurb describes it even, is that it's this man who has some twins and he does an experiment where he tries to work out whether speaking is innate or whether it is learnt. So he locks his twins away, he gives them no verbal interaction in their life, and he wants to see whether they develop a language of their own or whether they just remain completely mute for the rest of their lives. I wouldn't say that that's what this book is about particularly. It's the crux of it, but we don't meet the twins until 150 pages in, and it's only 200 pages long. So for a lot of it, I wasn't sure if it was a bit slow. Possibly because what I thought was going to happen wasn't happening. I did love this book, and it was so close to a 5-star read for me because it's kind of genius. Like, it's kind of genius, but I couldn't decide whether it was genius or not. So we feel quite detached throughout to this character we basically follow him from childhood, and his mother sort of gave him a lot of issues and was quite a strange woman, and from a young age he was very fascinated with sort of fossils and skulls and skeletons and kind of the macabre things of life. He ends up from quite early on having a fascination with this idea of language and the fact that maybe voices are the expression of the soul and therefore integral to the human being and would develop without any learning happening at all. And he sort of tells us about studies of previous things. I don't know if they're real previous things, they're probably fictionalised. He then ends up putting out an advert asking for people who sort of have children with difficulties in speech, etc. And a mother ends up answering his advert, and it all gets weird. This book is dark. Like, I like dark books and I like dark things. This book took it to the next level, and there were some parts in here that even I was uncomfortable with reading. It takes it where you don't think it's gonna go every time. You're just like, he's not. He does. He really does. But I loved it for that, because I like things that really push the boundaries, and this pushed the boundaries on human comfort to the nth degree. basically ends up being a very bad man. We follow him through a few occasions in his life where his actions are kind of very questionable, and that leads to ultimately the birth of the twins at the end and the experiment. It's excellent. Like, as I say, it's so close to genius, but it just slightly wasn't there for me. The thing that makes it hard for me to call is because the one thing that I kind of didn't enjoy about it was the fact that these things were happening, but I felt detached. I felt like I wasn't there. I felt like I didn't truly know him. But in hindsight, when I got to the end, I thought, well, it's kind of intentional. Like, he does these things in a very casual manner. And I think the fact that we're detached from it is very intentional, in the fact that if we were too involved, John Burnside wouldn't have been able to go to the degrees that he did go to. But as it was, he could put such uncomfortable things in there because we were taken out of the story slightly. We were removed so we could look at them without being absolutely horrified in a way. So the thing that I didn't like is also a very clever, intentional thing that kind of helped the story in the end. So I don't know how I felt about it. I think it was genius. I think I'm going to remember this book forever, and I do want to reread it at some point so I can just make sure. But I think it's really good. I do think it's really good, gonna be honest. So that was all my reading for the second part of August. Hope you all had a good reading month. Let me know down below what you've been reading and if you've read any of these and what you thought, especially about The Dumb House. I think it kind of divides opinion, so I would like to hear what people think about that one. Bye!